I'm Jeff Blauette, technical agronomist for Co-op Farmers Elevator. Kind of wanted to talk about today a few burn down topics. We're kind of at that time of year on these no-till acres where we've got to deal with some things, and I wanted to touch on a few of the keys. This is a field that has not been sprayed. It's going to be no-till beans, but you can see there's a fair amount of small weeds that are just starting to come now. Here we're getting the third week of April, a little after. Probably a couple of the key weeds we got to deal with in no-till. One of the biggest concern weeds is we've got mare's tail. Of course, we've always got some dandelions around. We've got sow thistle, prickly lettuce, pennycress, mustards. Usually are some of the key weeds that are able to germinate and grow in cold weather, or winter annuals that germinated last fall that are starting up again this spring. Mare's tail is kind of becoming more of a problem weed, of course. We have some that are starting to generate Roundup resistance, so management small and with multiple modes of action is pretty important. As you can see, we've got mare's tail. It's actually just starting to grow some verticality. It's not just flat on the ground like when it first comes up. It's pretty key that we get those sprayed here soon before they get much size to them, because they're just going to become more and more difficult to control. Dandelions the same way. If we can get those before they start forming any seed heads, especially as we get into pennycress and some of those other weeds that really will do that early. Mustard's another one. But we need to have a solid herbicide program, and the challenge is we're spraying these a lot of times when the weather is pretty cold and control is difficult. So we need to understand the dynamics of trying to kill these weeds and what works the best, and trying to skimp probably is not going to be successful because we're in tough environments to kill things when it's cold. So I think the key we want to touch on here is small, early, and with an adequate dose of products that are effective. All right, in this field, we've got a burn down herbicide sprayed probably about 8 days ago, so roughly about mid-April. And as you can see, we've got a wide variety of weeds as you usually do in a no-till field. We've got, your mustards, we've got some mare's tail, and we've got some pennycress, kind of a lot of your normal winter annuals that we have to fight in no-till field. We've got some dandelions here. But as you can kind of see, these winter annuals, we're already starting to get to the point where we've got some heads. They're already getting to the point where they're almost in a reproductive stage. And they become a lot tougher to kill. And if you look at some of these smaller mustards, the mare's tail, they're not headed out. They're dying really well, gonna die for sure. My concern is this year, as early as we got the frost out and this thing started to grow, we've got some pretty good sized pennycress here, and even some of the mustards that have kind of gotten ahead on it. You can kind of tell they're not really as dead and as curled up as some of the smaller weeds. It becomes tough when we have a year where the warm weather starts so early and these things kind of get ahead of us. So this was sprayed a week ago. We've got a lot of fields that have not been sprayed yet that need to be burned down. That is a concern that we have. Just need to keep an eye on these as the season goes after planting and see if we have to retreat, spray these fields earlier. As we look around, there's quite a bit of damage to most of these weeds. I think we're going to be in pretty good shape in general, but again, my concern is the size of these weeds if they weren't sprayed already, and how big they'd be getting and how much flower head development there would be, and if we can get them anymore. So the other thing to keep in mind is these fields, or this field, did not get a liquid nitrogen application. It was sprayed with just water. A lot of these fields were trying to do burn downs with herbicide and liquid nitrogen together. If you go out and burn these weeds with liquid nitrogen, you've got a lot better chance of those weeds getting shocked from that nitrogen burn, not taking the herbicide in and not doing as good a job. So obviously that makes it even more important to get these things sprayed when they're small and get good coverage on them. So that's kind of what we really want to focus on and have as a really important goal, is to be timely as best we can, but understand sometimes this is the best we can do, and the weather doesn't always allow us to do everything perfectly. So We just need to keep up on these fields and make sure they get scouted after they're planted. If they have to be sprayed with a post application earlier, so be it, but let's keep an eye on them as the season goes through the early part of the development here. Another topic that we end up having that's kind of new this year and the last few years is dealing with these burn downs of these cover crops. There's obviously some benefits to cover crops. You've got some growth in the soil, helping microbial activity and some root development in there, and it always helps soil structure, keeping that soil alive and vibrant. One of the other benefits, if you notice around this field, doesn't have a lot of weeds out here, it's just rye. This rye was sprayed a little over a week ago. It's not dead yet, but it is dead. It just doesn't look like it's dried up and ready to blow away yet or disc under. It takes a little time for that to happen. But if you look at the fact there's no other weeds out here, the competitive nature of that cover crop starting early and getting canopy is pretty impressive. If you look over here, you'll notice there's a couple of mustard plants. In this area, you can see there's a couple little gaps in the rye stand, and that's the only place any of those winter annuals came up. Otherwise, where we've got a good stand, you don't see any other weeds. So that speaks to the competitive nature of keeping that canopy clean of everything but the rye. So it's kind of impressive actually if you look at it in a scenario we can go out and kill this rye and a lot of the weeds never even bothered to come up. So should make for a good seed bed to plant into without a lot of weed competition once the rye is knocked out. As we talked about a little bit ago, this rye has been sprayed a little over a week ago, and it's not brown and dried up yet, but if you look here right next to the fence, there's just right by the driveway here, there's a foot or two that the sprayer did not quite get up to the brome grass, and you can see the size difference between the unsprayed and the sprayed. So it's definitely stopped the growth, which usually means with Roundup it's probably a good shot that it's killed. We just haven't had enough sunshine and hot weather to kind of dry it up, and so it's done a good job. But just visually, if you don't see what it would look like, you're not sure if it's doing the job. But it does take a little time for this to get knocked out. But for cover crops and taking care of these fields that have rye in them, timing is going to be the key. You got to have this stuff killed at least 2 weeks before you plant corn, ideally. That sounds easy until spring breaks loose, so you got to kind of keep those things in mind. The cover crops have a lot of benefits, but they do have to have an extra step of management that we have to be able to accomplish. So that's kind of an idea of cover crops as part of our burn down session here.